It was just past 6:30 in the evening, the kind of winter night where the cold seemed to seep into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. The wind outside moaned through the gaps in the old window frames, rattling them every so often like impatient fingers tapping on glass. Margaret Hayes sat alone at her small wooden kitchen table, staring at the half-empty cup of tea in front of her. Her life had grown quiet over the last few years, too quiet. Her husband had passed away 3 winters ago, and her grown children lived in different states, their visits scattered between birthdays and holidays. Most nights, her company was the ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of the fridge. That's why the sudden knock on the door startled her. It wasn't the polite, hesitant knock of a neighbor or delivery driver. This was a firm, almost urgent series of raps that made her pause with her hand halfway to the teapot. She hesitated. At this time of night, in this weather, who could it possibly be? When she finally pulled the door open, a gust of icy air rushed in, along with the figure of a man standing on her porch. He looked to be in his late 60s, maybe older. His clothes were worn and frayed, his coat too thin for the freezing temperatures. Snow clung to the brim of his cap, and his hands trembled slightly, whether from cold or something else, she couldn't tell. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low but steady, "I'm sorry to bother you. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Could you spare me something? Anything?" Margaret's instinctive caution kicked in. She lived alone. The world had changed, you didn't just invite strangers in anymore. But then her eyes fell on his hands, the skin cracked and raw, nails rimmed with dirt, and the deep hollowness in his eyes. Without quite realizing it, she said, "Come in before you freeze." The man stepped inside, careful not to track too much snow onto her rug. Margaret guided him toward the kitchen, where the warmth of the stove filled the air. She set about heating a pot of soup, the same vegetable broth she often made for herself. As it simmered, she noticed him glancing around the room, not with greed, but with something else, a quiet, almost reverent curiosity, as if he hadn't stood in a warm, lit kitchen in a very long time. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Daniel," he replied after a pause. "Just Daniel." He didn't say much more, and she didn't press. Instead, she ladled the steaming soup into a bowl and placed it before him, along with a thick slice of bread. He ate slowly at first, then with more urgency, as if each bite might disappear if he didn't take it quickly enough. When he finished, he looked at her with eyes that seemed both grateful and haunted. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I won't forget this." Margaret gave a small smile. "It's just soup, Daniel." But as he left that night, disappearing into the snow with nothing more than a nod, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than she understood, and that this knock on her door had set something in motion she could not yet name. The next morning, Margaret thought about Daniel more than she wanted to admit. She had fed strangers before, a stray cat that lingered on her porch, a lost child she once gave cookies to while waiting for his mother to arrive, but this was different. There had been something in Daniel's eyes last night. Not just hunger, but an old sorrow, the kind that lingers long after the moment that caused it. 3 nights later, the knock came again. It was gentler this time, as though he didn't want to disturb her if she wasn't home. Margaret opened the door without hesitation. "You're back," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I was hoping you might have some of that soup," he said, almost apologetically. She did. And soon, he was sitting at her kitchen table again, the two of them surrounded by the faint smell of rosemary and garlic. It became a quiet routine. Daniel never came every day, never stayed too long, and never asked for more than a single meal. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes scrambled eggs and toast, sometimes a plate of spaghetti. She never asked where he went when he left, and he never volunteered much. But over the weeks, bits of his story began to emerge. "I used to work in carpentry," he told her one evening, as he carefully tore his bread into small pieces. "Made furniture, chairs mostly. You learn a lot about patience when you work with wood. But things fell apart. He didn't explain how, and she didn't push. Sometimes, he would share observations about the world, the kindness of a bus driver who let him ride without fare, the way fresh snow made the city seem almost clean again. And sometimes, Daniel would ask her questions. Do you live alone? Yes. Do you get lonely? Sometimes. Once, he brought her something, a small, hand-carved wooden bird. The details were worn, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. I made it a long time ago, he said simply, placing it on her kitchen counter. Thought you might like it. She did. She placed it on her windowsill, where the morning sun caught its curves. As the weeks turned into months, Margaret found herself looking forward to Daniel's visits. Not just because she enjoyed feeding him, but because he seemed to fill a quiet space in her life that she hadn't realized was empty. Yet there was always a lingering mystery around him. Sometimes his eyes would cloud over, his voice trailing off mid-sentence. There were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't name, part gratitude, part something heavier. One night, just before leaving, Daniel paused at the door. You've been kinder to me than anyone in years, he said. I wish I could repay you. Margaret shook her head. Kindness isn't a debt, Daniel. He gave her a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe not. But sometimes, it still finds its way back to you. And with that, he stepped into the dark. She didn't know it then, but those would be some of the last words she'd ever hear him say. It was a Tuesday night when Margaret noticed it. The soup pot simmered quietly on the stove, the smell of thyme and carrots filling the air, but the knock never came. She told herself maybe he was delayed, maybe the buses were running late, maybe the cold had slowed him down. But Wednesday came. And Thursday. And still, no Daniel. By Friday, the knot in her stomach had tightened into something sharp. She pulled on her coat and hat, determined to find him. She had no address, no phone number, not even a last name. All she had was the memory of his stories and the direction he usually walked when he left. Margaret took the bus into the city, her eyes scanning doorways, park benches, and alleyways. She asked at a small church that sometimes served free meals. The pastor's face fell at the mention of Daniel. You didn't hear, he said softly. He passed away 2 nights ago. Heart failure. He was at the shelter when it happened. Peaceful, at least. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. She gripped the edge of the wooden pew to steady herself. The pastor handed her a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He wanted this given to you. Said you'd know why. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it. Inside was a notebook, worn, the leather cover cracked with age, and a sealed envelope with her name written in an unsteady hand. She opened the letter first. Margaret, I don't have much in this life, but I wanted you to know what you gave me. You didn't just feed me. You reminded me what it felt like to be seen, to matter. Every meal at your table gave me something I hadn't had in years, hope. This notebook is my life's work. Every piece of furniture I designed, every sketch, every idea I dreamed of building. I thought it would all vanish with me. But I want you to have it. Maybe you'll find someone who can bring these designs to life. Maybe they'll carry my work forward, the way your kindness carried me. Thank you for every bowl of soup, every warm word, every moment you gave without asking for anything back. You changed the ending of my story. Your friend. Daniel. Margaret's hands shook as she turned the pages of the notebook. Inside were intricate, beautiful sketches of chairs, tables, cabinets, each with notes in the margins. Some had smudges where pencil had been erased and redrawn, showing the care and precision of a true craftsman. She clutched it to her chest, tears blurring her vision. In the weeks that followed, Margaret couldn't bear to let the designs sit unseen. She reached out to a local woodworking shop, showing them Daniel's work. The owner, impressed by the detail and artistry, agreed to produce a few pieces. Soon, the Daniel collection became a small but growing success, with part of the proceeds going toward the homeless shelter where Daniel had stayed. And every time she saw one of his pieces in someone's home, Margaret would think of that winter night, the knock on her door, and the stranger who had left behind more than she ever expected, not just a notebook of designs, but a legacy of hope, kindness, and the reminder that even the smallest act can change someone's life forever. Because sometimes, the gift you give comes back to you, in ways you never see coming.